All right, back on the Young Turks. Now I'm very excited to have a guest with us, Daniel Ellsberg of the Pentagon Papers fame, the original whistleblower. Now, there was whistleblowers before, but obviously a very, very well-known and respected one. Welcome to the show. We really appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
I know that you're part of ReThink Afghanistan campaign that Brave New Films is putting together, and you want to talk about the Eikenberry Papers, and I do as well. When I get to that in a second, explain people what that is. But of course, I want to ask you a little bit, since this is the first time we're talking, about your decision to leak the Pentagon Papers. You've probably been asked this a million times, but I'm nonetheless curious. So you worked in government, you worked in the Defense Department, State Department, you worked with McNamara. What did you see in the Pentagon Papers that pushed you to the decision to leak them?
Well, the first point was that just 40 years ago, this last fall, in 1969, I became aware, just about the time that I finished reading the early parts of the Pentagon Papers, which go back to 1945, and they ended in 1968, just before Nixon came in. I learned that Nixon was making threats against North Vietnam that were almost certain to extend the war and actually enlarge it. He talked about ending the war honorably, but what he had in mind secretly was ending it with something very close to a victory, and to do that by threatening to blow North Vietnam to pieces, even with nuclear weapons, if they didn't meet his terms. Terms that they never did meet, by the way, and which were really infeasible. So I was sure that they would refuse those terms, and that the result was he was going to carry out these threats, possibly even use nuclear weapons. So the question was what to do about that. And putting out the Pentagon Papers was not the first thing that came to my mind on that, because it wasn't so obvious that it would really help. It ended before Nixon came in. He could easily say that that was the Democrats' policy. He was secretly really reproducing the Democrats' policy in terms of threats and escalation, but the public didn't know that, and I couldn't prove it because I didn't have the documents. If I did, I would have put those out instead of the Pentagon Papers. But at any rate, I thought that for a month or so, when I first started copying, just 40 years ago, it was with some hope that if I got those out right away, he might even be led to correctly say that the Democrats had badly conducted the war, that it was hopeless, as it was, and that he had no choice but to close it out and push him in that direction. But he actually had no intention of doing that. That's, by the way, what Barack Obama could have done very reasonably. We can get back to that if you want, but he could have done that very well this last year and just said it was a good war in Afghanistan, good, necessary, just, things that he said in his campaign, rightly or wrongly, but said, but the last 8 years have made it hopeless, as indeed that is the case. And he could have said there's nothing to do but to cut our losses and to get out of there. He chose not to do it, just as basically Nixon chose not. So in my case, I did actually what somebody did in the Pentagon or the State Department just a few weeks ago. They released cables from our ambassador in Kabul, Carl Eikenberry, the former general who had been in charge in Afghanistan, and they released his secret cables saying that exactly why he thought the situation there was essentially hopeless. He didn't use that word, but he implied that, and that putting more troops in there would accomplish nothing. Well, that was the drift of the Pentagon Papers. In fact, I really hadn't seen secret cables laid out in facsimile since the Pentagon Papers in 40 years, the way that I did now on the Internet when the Times put out the Eikenberry cables, which, by the way, the Rethinking Afghanistan program that you mentioned has been publicizing. They've been putting it out. So for much the same reasons that led to that leak, which I think was to try to build some critical opposition to this escalation, which will lead to nothing but more death in Afghanistan on both sides and no other positive outcome. With the same thing in mind, I put out the evidence that for years, 4 presidents in a row had been told that the situation in Vietnam was no more promising than it is now for us in Afghanistan, and in hopes that the public would draw that conclusion, but they didn't come out until Nixon was well committed to the war.
When you leaked the papers, did you think that they were going to find out that you did it, and what did you think was going to happen to you?
Well, because of the scale of it, I put out 7,000 pages, top secret, to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, which is where I first gave them. And then 3,000 of those were on negotiations. I didn't give those to the newspapers because I didn't want to interfere with negotiations. I wanted to interfere with the war. But I did put out 4,000 top secret pages, and I knew that there were only a dozen or so people who had access to all those. They would quickly eliminate all the others as not being sufficiently committed. I think every one of those others wanted to see that war ended, but except for the copy in Henry Kissinger's safe in the Pentagon. But they would not be candidates for having done that because of what I expected to happen. I thought I would go to prison for the rest of my life.
Oh, wow, you thought that. And, well, it worked out a little better, I suppose, than you expected. And I've always been curious, after you can't work in the government anymore, how do you make a living?
Well, because Nixon took fairly dramatic actions against the paper and against me with no precedent, namely, of course, he issued the first injunctions to the newspapers to try to stop publication, the first time in our history that had happened. And he failed at that. His own Supreme Court, and that is justices, some he'd appointed, ruled against him. But then he prosecuted me and later my co-defendant, Tony Russo, the first people ever put on prosecution for a leak. I doubt if you knew that. Almost no one does know that our prosecution was the very first, because we really don't in this country have a law against leaks. They used the Espionage Act against me in a way it had never been done, without charging espionage, as if it were an official secrets act of the kind that most countries do have, including England. But we don't, because of the First Amendment and the revolution we had that the British didn't have. So we have guarantees of free speech in the press here that really preclude that kind of broad criminalization of dissent, or I should say of telling the truth to the public. It just is not criminal to do that. Nevertheless, they experimented with the prosecution against me. That slowed up other people from following the example. That's what it was meant to do. And then, more significantly, Nixon took criminal actions against me while I was on trial, of a number of kinds, to keep me from telling any secrets about him. Again, crimes that were then secret in this country because of our freedoms. And when those were discovered, my charges were eventually dismissed, and more importantly, he faced impeachment himself and had to resign. Well, with all that notoriety and drama, it gave me a platform, really, for lecturing, although I couldn't get a job in the government or even in universities that wanted government contracts, frankly. And that's pretty much all of them. Not all of them, but all of the prestigious Ivy League colleges. My old career was pretty well shut off to me, but I've been able to make a living as a lecturer ever since.
That's very interesting. We're talking to Daniel Ellsberg, who, of course, released the Pentagon Papers. So now let's tie that back to Afghanistan. As I said in the beginning, ReThink Afghanistan is something Brave New Films is doing.
I'm glad you're aware of that program. Your listeners should be aware of it. Do you know how you get it on the net? I guess, is it just ReThink Afghanistan?
It's ReThinkAfghanistan.com. That's right.
Mm-hmm. Good, yeah.
And I know you and Matt Ho, who's been on the program a couple of times, speak about this there as well. So why do you tell the audience, if you could, please, what the Eikenberry Papers are and why you think they're so important?
Well, Matthew Ho, and let's get back to who he is, a very important person. But Matthew Ho did what Carl Eikenberry should have done. Eikenberry was the former lieutenant general, retired, who is now the ambassador in Kabul, as I said, in Afghanistan. And Matthew Ho was a young former Marine officer. Like me, he was a former Marine infantry company commander, but he was in combat in Iraq. I was a peacetime company commander in North Carolina and in the 50s. But we both had that background. He was in Iraq as a civilian, as I was in Vietnam as a civilian. Rather similar jobs in a way, but he was a senior officer in a particularly conflicted province in Afghanistan, and reached the same conclusion that I did so many years earlier in Vietnam, that he was facing a fight where it was our presence that was recruiting people for the opposition. They were fighting us because we were there in their country. And in fact, in both cases, I think the people joining the ranks against us did not necessarily agree with the ideology or the doctrine of the people leading it, communist in the case of Vietnam and fundamentalist Islamic in the case of the Taliban, but they were joining them because those people were leading a fight against foreign occupation, and effectively so. And by the way, in both cases, the same leadership had recently defeated another power that was occupying them. The Viet Cong had defeated, or the NLF had defeated the French, and the Taliban, with our help, had defeated the Soviets. So people were joining to expel these new invaders. And Ho concluded that we weren't going to beat them. They weren't going to give up. Just, it's funny, as I say this, I'm more and more conscious of just how similar our lives were. But his result was to leave the Foreign Service and the civilian job that he had in Afghanistan and come back to tell the truth personally on all the networks and everything before the president had made his decision. So he was doing what I've been urging officials to do. He didn't hear it from me, but for many years now, and that is, don't do what I did. Don't wait until bombs are falling and the escalation has occurred and the war is on and thousands more have died before you come back and tell your truth about the situation with documents. Now, he didn't have a lot of documents to put out that I know of in his province, but he didn't have his Pentagon Papers, and if he did, I think they would read just about the same as the ones I put out, except for place names. You could just reproduce them otherwise. And he came out and did, as I say, what Eikenberry should have done. Now, Eikenberry was his boss, and on the way out of Afghanistan, he conferred with Eikenberry, told him what he was going to do, and Eikenberry urged him to stay on his staff because he was so highly regarded. And let's continue the analogy here. As I was, I was the highest grade of civil service officer. I was an FSR 1 in Vietnam, as high as you can get without a presidential appointment. So I was highly regarded at that point. And they tried to get him to stay, and Richard Holbrooke, the ambassador at large here for the area, then tried to get him to stay on his staff, and very wisely he refused to be muzzled like that and came out to tell the truth. Eikenberry, meanwhile, Ho had said at the time that Eikenberry had agreed with him privately. We didn't get specific. Now we know exactly what he meant. Eikenberry's cables could have been written by Ho himself. Eikenberry's secret cables, when you read them in the Times, as people should do, or can read them on that website, ReThinkingAfghanistan.com, is it? Yeah.
That's right. ReThinkAfghanistan.com.
Their reading cables, that they say, were as pessimistic as could possibly be. And yet, instead of joining Ho and coming, Ho, and coming back and being willing to testify truthfully, and by the way, Ho would have made himself available, would have loved to testify under oath to Congress, but they didn't call him. He talked to people in private, but they didn't call him for testimony. Instead, they called Eikenberry, who, as the ambassador, who came back, sat next to General McChrystal at the table, with whom he totally disagreed in his cable, so much so that the story in the Washington Post, I think it was, when they came back was on the plane, they didn't talk to each other for 6 hours. They were totally at odds on what should be done. But after being briefed by people in the administration, Eikenberry raises his right hand and swears under oath that he totally agrees with the plan. He's on board. He has every confidence it's going to work. He can assure the Congress and the American people the opposite of what he had just said in secret to the president. In other words, he lied, as nearly any official in his position would do. The Pentagon Papers are just filled with lies like that, of public testimony and truth-telling in private. So the president had been warned, had ignored what Eikenberry said, And right now, the ReThinking Afghanistan campaign is issuing a petition, getting people to sign a petition, which is worth signing. I signed it, asking congressmen, your local congressperson, to read the Eikenberry cables. But I must say, I called the campaign just yesterday and said, I don't think that's adequate. The cables are out there. They can read them. But they've heard Eikenberry's testimony to the contrary now. Which are they to believe? Well, that's easily answered. They should call Eikenberry back, and I think people should call Congress and tell them, demand that he be brought back for testimony and allowed the chance to get himself straight here and to tell the truth under oath. Just ask him, explain to us, sir, the discrepancy between what you're now saying that you support putting tens of thousands more troops into Afghanistan, when a few weeks ago you were telling the president that was useless and even counterproductive, and give him a chance to tell the truth.
Well, that definitely won't happen. And the reason that it won't happen is because both Republicans and Democrats don't want it to happen. So that leads to my final question. And
by the way, I think you're probably right. Would you expand on that a minute, though? Why do you think that, let's say, the Democrats don't want that? The Republicans are in favor of the war, so definitely. The Democrats say they're against the war.
Yeah, right, of course they do.
But they don't want to disagree.
My guess is that you've been following American politics for the last several decades.
Yeah.
The Democrats say a lot of things they're not actually have any interest in doing.
They are bringing shame on themselves once again.
Yes, and so, this has been a long history. I was just reading Malcolm X last weekend, and he had the same problems that we have, which is the Democrats tell you they're going to do something, and the Republicans say, at least that the Republicans say, we're not going to do it, right? We're not going to give you civil rights. We're not going to give you health care reform. We're not going to get out of Afghanistan or Iraq. The Democrats say we're going to, and then don't.
That's right. All three leaders in Congress, Pelosi and Reid and the head of the Appropriations Committee, Obie, have all said they are very skeptical, quote, about the benefit of any further escalation.
Politics.
And yet, when it comes time to vote on the appropriations, what will they do? We can predict very closely. They'll all
fall in line. But that goes to my last question for you, and we're talking to Daniel Ellsberg, who leaked the Pentagon Papers, which is a guy like Obama, like a guy like Nixon, we understand. He was Machiavellian and never intended to do anything he promised, classic politician, etc. Obviously people had more hope in Obama. So do you think that Obama earnestly believes, and I guess that's a possibility, and I think maybe even a significant possibility, that he thinks, no, I can turn Afghanistan around, Eikenberry is wrong, McChrystal is right, we can do this? Or is there another reason why Obama is continuing in Afghanistan, and what would that be?
Of course, I don't know him directly, but I know I've read and I've dealt with a lot of people like him. Not presidents, they're all presidents, but and I didn't know them personally, but I read their inside memos and all this in the Pentagon Papers. I've studied for 40 years. He's like the others. The point of the Pentagon Papers was that the policy that was followed was remarkably continuous through really 5 presidents, adding Nixon, Democrat and Republican. Didn't make that much difference. The problem was not solved by changing parties and putting a new president in. And,
why? Who's pulling the strings?
Obama's very smart, but he's not actually smarter than Johnson, for example, or even Nixon. He has his own kind of intelligence that they probably don't have, but they had kinds that he doesn't have, probably. They were smart enough, and that did nothing for us. There were institutional and economic interests, various kinds of interests, service interests, military-industrial complex interests, imperial interests that worked on each of them in the same way, whatever they brought to that job. So leaving it up to the president is simply not an answer, any president, and it was a mistake of those who thought that it would.
But
I hoped it would.
But I have to be honest. But then in the conversation, and I'm already sufficiently discouraged with what's happened in the Obama administration so far on many fronts. But this conversation is even more discouraging, to be perfectly frank, because it doesn't matter if we vote for Republicans or Democrats. All we ever get is more war because
actually, I think it does matter in this sense. I don't think that the likely Republican candidates like McCain or Palin, let alone would be that much different from Bush in being really totally oblivious to public pressure from us, from our side. Like them, obviously Obama is much more responsive to that focused, concentrated campaign funding that he gets from Goldman Sachs and the Wall Street and the military and the insurance companies and so forth than he is from us, unorganized as we are. But I do think it does make a difference who's in the sense of how responsive they might be to mass pressure from citizens and from Congress if we can bring pressure to bear on Congress to live up to their oath of office, which is to defend the Constitution, not to obey the president of their party and not just get reelected. So I do think what it really means is if you want to place all your hope in what a president does, yes, you can give up on this issue. But that's not what our Constitution says. They put the power of the purse in Congress and the power of war and peace in Congress. And yes, those reflexes are very eroded by now. But it's up to us, and if we don't do it, shame on us to tell people in Congress.
And I don't want to discourage
doing is not good enough. You have to live up to your real responsibilities to us, or you will lose your job. And they may not see the light, as they say on the Hill, but they'll feel the heat.
And I don't want to discourage people too much. We did elect a Democratic president, and yes, he's escalated Afghanistan, but presumably he will be pulling out of Iraq a hell of a lot faster than John McCain would.
Oh, I don't presume that, as a matter of fact.
Okay.
I think,
there we go.
I think that Obama is lying when he says he intends to get all the troops out of Iraq. I don't think he has the slightest intention of removing our permanent bases in Iraq, which will require 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 troops there indefinitely. If he gets rid of those bases, it will be because there's been an upsurge in this country, which is hard to foresee, but something like that did happen in the Soviet Union, and we need that here.
All right. Wow. Okay. That was strong.
South Africa changed without violence. The change in Soviet Union took place without
Why? Do you
violence.
think the institutional powers...
we need a Gorbachev, and we don't have that, but we need people who will take our Constitution seriously and get that back for us.
Do you think the institutional powers and the corporate powers that feed these politicians these days, do you think that they have the American people in an apartheid system now?
Well, of course, we lived with literal apartheid for a long time, and it was no president who chose on his own to change that. I'm talking about segregation, Jim Crow. And that didn't change without movement by the afflicted people themselves and many white allies in this country. And without the pressure from below, the civil rights movement, as my late friend, close friend Howard Zinn said all the time, Lyndon Johnson was important there, but he would not have done what he did without the agitation and the initiative and the mass movement of the civil rights movement. So, and that combination got it together. And again, to give Lyndon Johnson his due, some other president might not have responded as effectively as he did. So it does make a difference. I voted for Obama, and I would vote for him again against the likely Republican candidates. And so, because I believe it does make a difference. But the difference it makes is the chance it gives us to make a difference under that president. And we're not doing that now. It's not happening now. But it could, and if it doesn't, as I said, shame on us. It's up to us.
All right. Daniel Ellsberg, now part of the ReThink Afghanistan campaign on ReThinkAfghanistan.com, put together by Brave New Films. Thank you so much for joining us on the Overturn.
Thanks for the chance.